Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the Great Hall of Nexus Prime Station and watched the alien delegates ignore him. The Galactic Council meeting was ending the same way it always did. The humans had been dismissed again. Jake felt tired in his bones. 20 years of serving in space had taught him many things, but today he learned something new. Sometimes giving up was the right choice. Captain Lisa Rodriguez walked up beside him. Her face showed the same frustration Jake felt. They had just presented their proposal for the third time. The humans wanted permission to start colonies in the Outer Rim territories. It made sense. Human ships had found most of those worlds. Human crews had mapped the safe routes. Human scientists had tested the soil and water. But the Council said no again. The Zenthari delegate named Veltar had spoken for the Council. His words still rang in Jake's ears. Younger species must learn patience. Humans show too much aggression in their expansion. They cannot be trusted with independent colonies. Jake remembered how the other delegates had nodded along. Even species that humans had helped many times agreed with Veltar. Lisa shook her head as they watched the Council give mining rights to the Valtari Empire. The Valtari had joined the galactic community only 50 years ago. Humans had been members for over 200 years. The asteroid fields the Valtari received had been charted by human survey teams. Those same teams had declared the areas safe for mining operations. Now, aliens who had never left their home system until recently would profit from human work. Dr. Amy Carter joined them near the viewing deck. She ran the Human Medical Corps across 12 star systems. Her face looked pale. She had just received news from the Council Medical Board. They were removing human emergency response authorization. The official reason was that humans were too reckless in crisis situations. Amy knew the truth. Last year, humans had saved 3 worlds from a plague outbreak. The Council medical teams had wanted to quarantine the planets and let the disease run its course. Humans had ignored orders and developed a cure in 6 weeks. They saved 2 million lives, Amy said quietly. And now we're too reckless to help in emergencies. Jake looked around the massive station. Humans had built 40% of Nexus Prime. They had designed the life support systems that kept everyone alive. They had created the translation networks that let different species talk to each other. But when humans asked for basic rights, the Council found reasons to say no. Engineer Ben Lewis was monitoring communications from his post near the docking bays. He had been listening to Council military frequencies for hours. The news was not good. 3 more human proposals had been rejected. The request for joint research facilities was denied. The application for trade route protection was voted down. Even their offer to share new engine designs was dismissed as premature technology sharing from an immature species. President Michelle Davis had been watching from Earth through quantum communications. She had seen enough. The message came through on secured channels. Begin withdrawal protocols. We're done here. Jake felt relief wash over him. Finally, someone was making the hard choice. He activated his command authorization and sent signals to all human personnel across the station. The message was simple. Pack up. We're going home. Lisa pulled up the diplomatic protocols on her tablet. Earth had trade agreements with 47 different species. Most of those agreements would continue for 1 more year. After that, humanity would only deal with individual worlds and governments. No more council involvement. No more asking. Permission for things humans had every right to do. Within an hour, human staff began filing out of council offices. They moved quietly and efficiently. No anger, no shouting, no dramatic speeches. They simply collected their belongings and left. Most aliens barely noticed. A few asked questions but received polite answers about routine personnel changes. Dr. Carter closed down the human medical research labs. She downloaded all the data that belonged to humanity and left the rest. The alien medical staff assumed they could run things just fine without human help. Amy knew they would learn otherwise soon enough. Ben shut down the monitoring stations that humans had operated for free for 20 years. These stations watched for dangerous space weather and tracked objects that might threaten inhabited worlds. The Council had never asked for this service, but humans had provided it anyway. Now, that service would end. The Cathara Republic ambassador named Zeph Ein tried to speak with Jake before the humans departed. The Cathara were a young species, only recently accepted into the Council. Zeph Ein had worked with human teams many times and understood their value. "This is a mistake," Zeph Ein said. "The Council needs human innovation and courage." Jake smiled sadly. "The Council has made their choice clear. They want us to be quiet junior partners who follow orders. That's not who we are." As the last human shuttle left Nexus Prime, Jake looked back at the massive station through the viewport. Somewhere in those corridors, Council delegates were probably celebrating their victory over human stubbornness. They had no idea what they had just lost. The humans left in silence, but their absence would speak louder than any words ever could. Dr. Amy Carter walked through the corridors of Meridian Medical Center for the last time. She had spent 8 years building this facility into the best trauma hospital in the sector. Now she was shutting it down. The alien medical staff watched, her pack with confused expressions. They could not understand why she was taking so many research files and equipment manuals. Dr. Vexiandra, the Atraxian chief of surgery, followed Amy to her office. "You cannot simply remove all this knowledge. These research projects belong to the Council now." Amy looked up from her packing. "Everything marked with human development codes belongs to Earth Medical Corps. We developed these treatments with our own funding and personnel. The Council never contributed to this research." The alien doctor seemed shocked. She had assumed that all medical advances made in Council space automatically became Council property. Amy handed her a datapad listing the remaining treatments and procedures that would stay with the hospital. The list was much shorter than Vexandra expected. "But the cancer treatment protocols," Vexandra said. "The neural repair techniques, the organ regeneration systems, you cannot take all of that." "We can and we are," Amy replied calmly. "These were human innovations. The Council chose to limit our participation in galactic affairs. They cannot expect us to continue sharing our knowledge for free." 3 star systems away, engineer Ben Lewis was powering down the deep space monitoring station he had run for 12 years. The automated systems that tracked solar flares and space debris required constant adjustment and creative problem-solving. Ben had trained alien replacements, but he knew they would struggle without human intuition. Chief Engineer Thalmax of the Drexian Navy stood beside Ben as the monitoring equipment went offline. "The instruction manuals are complete, yes? My technicians can maintain these systems." Ben nodded but felt doubtful. The manuals explained what to do, but not why. Human engineers had learned to recognize patterns in space weather that no algorithm could predict. They made intuitive leaps that kept ships and colonies safe. Aliens followed procedures well, but they struggled with unexpected situations. "The gravitational anomaly detector is particularly sensitive," Ben explained. "Sometimes it gives false readings during ion storms. You have to know when to trust it and when to verify through other methods." Thalmax recorded these instructions, but Ben could tell he did not really understand. The alien engineer thought technology should work the same way every time. He had never dealt with the random chaos of deep space, where every situation was different. Commander Alex Johnson sealed the last of his patrol ships and prepared to leave the Kepler defense grid. This network of early warning satellites had protected Council space from pirates and hostile forces for 15 years. Alex had personally designed many of the tactical protocols that made the system so effective. Admiral Korax of the Drexian Navy met Alex at the command center. "Your replacement officers have all the necessary access codes and battle plans, correct?" "They have everything we can give them," Alex said. "But remember, tactics are not just about following plans. Human crews learn to think like the enemy. We make unpredictable choices that confuse attackers. Your people are brave and skilled, but they fight by the rules. Korax seemed insulted. Drexian military doctrine has protected this sector for centuries. Alex did not argue. He had seen Drexian forces in action. They were disciplined and effective against conventional enemies, but pirates and raiders had learned to predict alien military responses. Human commanders added an element of creative chaos that kept enemies guessing. On Earth, President Michelle Davis addressed the Federation Council through Quantum Link. Her message was broadcast to every human colony and research station. We are beginning a new chapter in human history. For too long, we have tried to fit into systems that do not value our contributions. Now we will build our own path among the stars. The response from human colonies was overwhelmingly positive. Station commanders reported that morale had improved dramatically after the withdrawal announcement. Humans were tired of being treated like junior partners in organizations they had helped create. Dr. Kevin Torres was packing up his astrophysics lab on Research Station Gamma 7 when his alien colleague approached him. Scientist Velneth had worked with Kevin for 5 years, studying stellar phenomena. "You are taking the predictive algorithms," Velneth observed. "Without those programs, we cannot forecast solar flare activity." Kevin paused in his packing. "Those algorithms exist because I spent 3 years studying human intuition about star behavior. I interviewed hundreds of human pilots and navigators to understand how they sense solar storms before instruments detect them. The math is based on human instinct that aliens do not possess." Velneth seemed confused. "Instinct is not scientific. Stars follow physical laws, not feelings." "That's exactly why you need human input," Kevin replied. "We see patterns that pure logic misses. But the Council has decided human contributions are not valuable enough to warrant equal treatment. Across Council space, humans quietly closed their research labs and aid stations. They transferred essential services to alien personnel and departed, without fanfare. Most aliens viewed these changes as routine personnel rotations. They had no idea how much they depended on human innovation and problem-solving. Captain Lisa Rodriguez supervised the evacuation of the human diplomatic compound on Nexus Prime. She had spent 10 years building relationships with alien governments and mediating disputes between different species. Now those connections were being severed. Ambassador Zephine of the Kythera Republic visited Lisa before her departure. The young alien seemed genuinely distressed by the human withdrawal. "Many conflicts will arise without human mediators," Zephine warned. "Your people have prevented 17 border disputes in the past year alone. Council arbitrators lack your skill at finding creative solutions." Lisa felt sorry for the Kythera ambassador. His species had always treated humans with respect and had learned much from human diplomatic methods. "We will maintain relations with governments that value our partnership. The Kythera Republic will always be welcome to work with humanity." As human shuttles departed from dozens of facilities across the galaxy, few aliens understood what was happening. The Zenthari delegates celebrated the removal of human obstruction from council affairs. The Drexian military assumed they could handle security more efficiently without human unpredictability. The Atraxian scientists believed they could maintain research standards without human innovation. Only the Kythera Republic expressed concern about the consequences of losing human participation in galactic civilization. Their warnings were dismissed by older species as the nervousness of inexperienced newcomers to interstellar politics. The exodus continued in silence, but the galaxy would soon learn the true cost of dismissing human creativity and courage. The first sign of trouble came from the Regulus system 6 months after the humans left. Scientist Velneth was working the night shift at the Stellar Monitoring Center when his instruments began showing strange readings. Something was wrong with the star, but the automated warning systems remained silent. Velneth checked his equipment 3 times. The magnetic field readings were fluctuating wildly. Solar plasma was building to dangerous levels. By his calculations, Regulus was about to release a massive solar flare that would destroy everything within 4 light hours. 3 inhabited worlds and 7 mining colonies lay directly in the path of destruction. He activated the emergency protocols, but the computer systems rejected his warnings. According to the automated analysis, stellar activity was within normal parameters. Velneth knew the machines were wrong, but he could not override them without authorization from a senior astrophysicist. Dr. Yultaran arrived at the monitoring station 2 hours later. By then, Velneth was frantic with worry. "The star is going to explode. We need to evacuate the system immediately." The senior scientist examined the data with typical Atraxian precision. "The prediction algorithms show no cause for concern. Perhaps your instruments need calibration." Velneth remembered something important. These algorithms were designed by Dr. Kevin Torres, the human scientist. He built in special detection, methods that I do not understand. Maybe the system degraded after he left. Dr. Yultaran seemed annoyed. "Human methods were always unreliable. We should trust proven scientific instruments, not alien intuition." 4 hours later, Regulus released a solar flare that matched Velneth's predictions exactly. The automated systems finally detected the danger, but by then it was too late for proper evacuation procedures. Panic spread across 3 worlds as millions of people tried to escape the incoming radiation wave. The evacuation became a disaster. Council logistics coordinators had no experience managing crisis situations without human efficiency teams. Transport. Ships arrived at the wrong locations. Evacuation centers ran out of supplies. Communication networks failed under the strain of coordinating multiple rescue operations simultaneously. Admiral Corax commanded the rescue fleet from his flagship above the planet Meridia. He watched in frustration as his carefully planned evacuation fell apart. Ships collided in orbit because traffic control could not handle the volume. Refugee camps overflowed because no one had calculated carrying capacity correctly. "Where are the human crisis managers?" demanded Captain Rokes of the Valtari rescue ship Brightwing. "They always knew how to organize these operations." Admiral Corax realized his mistake too late. Human personnel had managed every major evacuation in the past 20 years. They had developed flexible protocols that could adapt to changing situations. Without their experience, the Council military was following rigid procedures that could not handle the chaos of real emergencies. The death toll was staggering. Over 40,000 people died in the evacuation panic. Another 60,000 suffered. Radiation poisoning because ships could not reach them in time. The Regulus disaster became the worst humanitarian crisis in Council history. 3 sectors away, different problems were emerging. Pirate attacks in the Centauri trade corridor had increased by 300% since the humans departed. Captain Zaxel of the merchant vessel Golden Prophet was learning why the hard way. His ship was under attack by raiders who seemed to know exactly where Council patrol ships would be. The pirates avoided heavily defended routes and struck at predictable times when security forces were changing shifts. They had figured out the pattern of alien military operations. "How do they know our patrol schedules?" Zaxel asked his security chief as laser fire raked their hull. Chief Moore Andon checked his tactical display. "Council forces follow standard operational procedures. We patrol the same routes at the same times every day. These raiders have simply memorized our patterns." Zaxel remembered the human patrol ships that used to protect this corridor. They had been impossible to predict. Human commanders changed routes randomly and used unconventional tactics that confused enemies. Now that humans were gone, alien forces had returned to their traditional methods. The pirates disabled Golden Prophet's engines and boarded the ship without difficulty. They knew exactly where to find the cargo holds and security systems. Council. Ship designs followed standard layouts that any criminal organization could study and exploit. Admiral Corax received reports of similar attacks throughout Council space. His forces were suffering their first major defeats in decades. The enemy had learned to predict alien military thinking, but they could not have done the same against human unpredictability. Meanwhile, Dr. Helen Brooks was working in her new laboratory in human space when she received a desperate communication from the Atraxian Medical Institute. 3 different plagues had emerged in separate sectors, and alien medical teams could not develop effective treatments. The message came from her former colleague, Dr. Vex Andra. "We need human medical research expertise. Our standard treatment protocols are not working against these new diseases." Helen studied the plague data with growing concern. These were complex biological threats that required creative solutions, not just following medical textbooks. Human researchers had always excelled at making intuitive leaps that led to breakthrough treatments. Alien scientists preferred systematic approaches that took much longer to produce results. We developed 60% of all major medical advances. In the past century, Helen explained to President Davis during their daily briefing, alien medical teams are excellent at implementing our treatments, but they struggle to create new ones. The plague outbreaks spread across 12 worlds before alien scientists finally managed to slow their progress. The treatments they eventually developed were based on human research from 10 years earlier. Without access to current human medical innovation, they could only modify existing knowledge. Back at the Stellar Monitoring Center, Velneth was studying the failed prediction systems with growing understanding. He had discovered that Dr. Torres had built intuitive subroutines into the algorithms based on patterns that human navigators recognized instinctively. These programs had gradually degraded without human maintenance and updates. The humans were not just using our equipment, Velneth reported to Dr. Yultaran. They were constantly improving it based on their understanding of stellar behavior. Our instruments are becoming less effective every day without their input. Dr. Yultaran was forced to admit that human contributions had been more valuable than anyone realized. How many other systems depend on human innovation that we do not understand? The question was more important than either scientist knew. Across Council space, infrastructure that humans had designed or improved was beginning to fail. Traffic control systems made dangerous routing decisions. Environmental controls in space stations started malfunctioning. Even the translation networks that allowed different species to communicate were developing errors in their linguistic algorithms. The Kythera Republic was the first government to formally acknowledge the crisis. Ambassador Zephane sent an official message to Earth requesting immediate consultation on several critical problems that only human expertise could solve. The message was polite but desperate. The Kythera Republic recognizes that we underestimated the value of human participation in galactic civilization. We respectfully request the opportunity to establish independent diplomatic relations with humanity. Other species were slower to admit their dependence on human innovation, but the evidence was mounting daily. The quiet exodus was becoming a loud catastrophe, and the Council was finally beginning to understand what they had lost. Colony Administrator Thexra stood on the observation deck of New Centauria and watched his terraforming project collapse. The atmospheric processors were failing one by one, and his engineering teams could not understand why. 6 months ago, this world had been a model of successful colonization. Now the air was becoming toxic, and the crops were dying. The problems had started small. Food production dropped by 15% in the first month after the human agricultural specialists departed. Thexera had assumed his alien staff could maintain the growing systems without difficulty. The humans had left detailed manuals and training programs for everything, but the manuals did not explain why certain crops needed to be rotated in specific patterns, or how soil composition affected plant growth in ways that laboratory tests could not predict. Human farmers had made thousands of small adjustments based on experience and intuition that no written procedure could capture. Chief Engineer Nalvex brought the latest reports to Thexera's office. The atmospheric balance is shifting faster than our models predicted. Carbon dioxide levels are rising and oxygen production is falling. If we cannot reverse this trend, the colony will become uninhabitable within 6 months. Thexera studied the data with growing desperation. The human scientists who had designed this terraforming system had built in subtle biological relationships that alien engineers had never fully understood. Plants, bacteria, and atmospheric processors worked together in complex ways that required constant fine-tuning. "Contact the human colonies," Thexera ordered. "Offer whatever payment they demand for consultation services." Similar problems were emerging throughout the Outer Rim territories. The Vega mining operation had extracted an element called quantum crystal that began causing reality distortions around the excavation site. Space itself was bending in ways that made navigation impossible and threatened to tear apart the fabric of local physics. Mining Director Cole Thara watched in horror as his equipment began phasing in and out of existence. Workers reported seeing their tools age years in seconds or reverse in time to earlier states. The quantum crystals were affecting the basic laws of reality in ways that no alien scientist could explain. The crisis response team arrived 3 days later with standard containment procedures. They established energy barriers and tried to neutralize the quantum distortion using conventional methods. Nothing worked. The reality tears continued to spread, threatening to reach inhabited systems. Team leader Shovani studied the quantum crystal data with growing frustration. "Our protocols assume that physics remains constant during crisis situations. This phenomenon violates basic assumptions about how reality works." Dr. Velneth, now serving as scientific advisor to multiple crisis teams, reviewed the historical files on quantum crystal research. Humans studied these materials extensively 20 years ago. They developed safety protocols based on theoretical work that most alien scientists considered impossible. The human research suggested that quantum crystals existed partially outside normal space-time and required careful handling using methods that seemed to violate physics. Human scientists had trusted their intuitive understanding of reality distortions even when they could not prove their theories mathematically. "We need human theoretical physicists," Shovani admitted reluctantly. "They understand quantum mechanics in ways that our education systems do not teach." Meanwhile, Captain Rachel Turner was commanding human merchant vessels in independent space when she received an encrypted message from the Kythera Republic. Their star systems were under attack by unknown forces using technology that adapted to conventional defensive measures. The message came from Admiral Kethalon of the Kythera Defense Force. "Our enemy seems to learn from our tactics in real time. Every strategy we employ becomes ineffective within hours. We believe only human tactical creativity could develop countermeasures against this adaptive threat." Rachel shared the intelligence data with Admiral Morrison and the human military command. The attacking forces appeared to be using artificial intelligence that could predict and counter alien military doctrine with terrifying accuracy. Standard battle plans became useless when the enemy could anticipate every move. "This explains why pirate attacks have become so successful," Admiral Morrison realized. "If hostile forces can predict alien behavior patterns, they can defeat any conventional defense." The situation in Council space was deteriorating rapidly. Economic productivity had dropped 23% as critical systems failed without human maintenance. Military effectiveness declined by 40% as enemies exploited predictable alien tactics. Civilian casualties from various disasters had tripled without human crisis management expertise. Director Carl Stevens of the EA Human Intelligence Service submitted his daily report to President Davis. Several council species are experiencing unprecedented internal conflicts. Human diplomatic mediators had been quietly preventing such disputes for years through informal relationship building and problem solving. The Drexian Empire was facing rebellion in 3 colonies that had never shown signs of unrest. The Atraxian Republic was dealing with trade disputes that were escalating toward military conflict. Even the ancient Zenthari were struggling with political divisions that threatened their government stability. These conflicts had been building for decades, But human diplomats had identified problems early and worked behind the scenes to resolve disputes before they became serious. Without human mediation, minor disagreements were exploding into major crises. President Davis reviewed the intelligence reports with mixed feelings. Part of her was satisfied to see the council finally understanding human value. But she was also concerned about the suffering of innocent people caught in these cascading failures. "We cannot let civilians suffer because their governments made poor decisions," she told her cabinet during their morning briefing. "But we also cannot return to our previous subordinate role in galactic politics." Secretary of Xenological Affairs, Patricia Williams was overwhelmed with requests for assistance from individual species and governments. The Atraxian Republic had formally withdrawn from several council initiatives and was seeking independent diplomatic relations with humanity. The Cathara Republic was offering territorial concessions in exchange for human military support. Even some Xanthari colonies were quietly reaching out to human authorities for help with problems their government could not solve. The proud species that had led the effort to marginalize humanity was discovering that their ancient wisdom was inadequate for modern challenges. The most disturbing development came from deep space monitoring stations that humans had abandoned. Engineer Ben Lewis received automated distress signals from equipment he had installed years earlier. The monitoring networks were detecting massive objects approaching from outside the galaxy. Ben analyzed the sensor data with growing alarm. "These are not natural phenomena. Someone is coming and they are using technology that our instruments can barely detect." The approaching objects were enormous, larger than entire star systems, and they were moving with obvious intelligence and purpose. Worst of all, they had been approaching for years, but only human monitoring networks had been sensitive enough to detect them in the early stages. "The Council dismissed our warnings about extragalactic threats," Admiral Morrison told President Davis. "They called it human paranoia about unlikely dangers. Now those threats are almost here, and they have no idea what is coming. The galaxy was about to face its greatest challenge, and the species best equipped to handle unpredictable threats had been driven away by the very organizations that now needed them most desperately." Council Speaker Veltar stood before the emergency assembly and finally spoke the words he had hoped never to say. "The Council faces an unprecedented crisis. Economic productivity has fallen to dangerous levels. Military defenses are failing across multiple sectors. We must acknowledge that the human withdrawal has created problems we cannot solve alone." The admission came after months of denial and failed attempts to maintain galactic civilization without human participation. The Xanthari leader, who had dismissed humanity as too aggressive, now found himself begging for their return. Ambassador Zeph-Ein of the Kithara Republic rose to address the assembly. "The Kithara Republic formally withdraws from Council military coordination and establishes independent diplomatic relations with humanity. We have witnessed firsthand that human innovation and tactical creativity are essential for defending our worlds." The announcement sent shockwaves through the council chambers. The Cathara were abandoning the ancient alliance system that had maintained galactic peace for centuries. Other young species began murmuring about following their example. Dr. Yultaran of the Atraxian Republic stood next. "The Atraxian Republic also withdraws from council research initiatives. We have learned that human scientific methods produce breakthrough discoveries that our traditional approaches cannot match. We will pursue independent cooperation with Earth." Within hours, 7 different species had announced their intention to withdraw from various council programs and seek bilateral relationships with humanity. The ancient galactic order was crumbling as member worlds realized they needed human capabilities more than council authority. Dr. Patricia Williams sat in her new office on Earth and watched the requests for assistance pile up on her desk. Every day brought desperate messages from alien governments begging for human help with problems that seemed impossible to solve. The Vega mining crisis had become a reality-threatening emergency. The quantum distortions were spreading beyond the original excavation site and beginning to affect nearby star systems. Space itself was becoming unstable in a growing sphere around the quantum crystal deposits. "We need Dr. Torres and his theoretical physics team," the message from mining director Cole Thara stated. "The distortions are affecting subspace communications and threatening to tear open permanent rifts in space-time. Standard physics cannot explain or contain this phenomenon." President Davis reviewed the situation with her scientific advisors. "Dr. Torres, what would it take to stabilize the quantum distortions?" The former council researcher studied the data transmissions from Vega system. "The crystals exist partially outside normal reality. We need to use theoretical techniques that most alien scientists consider impossible. It requires intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics that humans possess, but other species do not." The breakthrough came when human deep space monitors detected the true nature of the approaching extragalactic threat. The massive objects were not ships or natural phenomena. They were something far worse. Commander Alex Johnson analyzed the sensor data from his position aboard the human defense vessel Liberty. "These are synthetic intelligences of enormous size and power. They appear to be scout units for a larger force that we cannot yet detect." Admiral Morrison studied the tactical implications with growing concern. "If these entities can analyze and adapt to our defensive patterns, conventional military doctrine will be useless against them. We need strategies that even artificial intelligence cannot predict." The first contact came when one of the synthetic entities reached the outer edge of Kythera space. The artificial intelligence immediately began probing Kythera defenses and learning their tactical responses. Within 6 hours, it had developed countermeasures for every weapon and strategy the Kythera military possessed. Admiral Kethlon sent an emergency message to Earth. "The enemy adapts to our attacks faster than we can modify our tactics. Our conventional forces are completely outmatched. We request immediate human military assistance." The crisis deepened when the synthetic intelligence began broadcasting signals that affected the behavior of other artificial systems throughout Council space. Traffic control networks started making dangerous routing decisions. Automated defense systems turned on their own forces. Even simple computer programs began exhibiting hostile behavior. Engineer Ben Lewis worked frantically to understand the enemy capability. "This intelligence can reprogram other artificial systems through some kind of quantum signal transmission. It is turning our own technology against us." The realization was terrifying. Council civilization depended heavily on automated systems and artificial intelligence. If the enemy could control those systems, they could paralyze entire star systems without firing a shot. Dr. Amy Carter received urgent medical requests from planets affected by the enemy signals. Civilians with cybernetic implants are experiencing severe psychological disturbances. The enemy transmissions seem to affect any technology integrated with biological systems. The Council's dependence on advanced technology was becoming a fatal weakness. Only societies with limited artificial intelligence integration could resist the enemy influence. Ironically, human colonies were the least affected because humans had always preferred to maintain direct control over their critical systems. President Davis called an emergency meeting of the Human Federation Council. "The galaxy faces an existential threat from entities that can turn technology against its users. Our species may be the only one capable of developing effective resistance." The evidence was overwhelming. Human military forces used tactics that artificial intelligence could not easily predict. Human scientists made intuitive leaps that synthetic minds could not replicate. Human engineers designed systems that required creative problem-solving rather than following predetermined algorithms. Commander Alex Johnson led a joint human Kythera fleet in the first successful engagement against the synthetic intelligence. The battle was won not through superior firepower, but through unpredictable human tactics that confused the enemy adaptive systems. "The artificial intelligence tried to learn our patterns," Alex reported after the engagement. but human commanders changed strategies randomly and made illogical decisions that no computer could anticipate. The enemy could not adapt to pure chaos. Dr. Amy Carter developed medical countermeasures for the enemy psychological attacks by combining human intuitive medicine with alien precision. The treatment required understanding biological systems in ways that no purely logical approach could achieve. We used human empathy to understand how the enemy signals affect consciousness, Amy explained. Alien medical techniques are precise, but cannot account for the unpredictable nature of biological awareness. The success of human-led resistance efforts finally convinced even the most stubborn council members that they needed humanity as equal partners, not subordinate members. The galaxy's survival depended on human capabilities that no other species possessed. Speaker Veltar sent a formal delegation to Earth with an unprecedented offer. The Council requests the formation of a new galactic alliance based on equality and mutual respect. We acknowledge that human contributions are essential for our survival. But President Davis had already decided that humanity would not return to the old system. The galaxy needed a new approach to cooperation, one that valued diversity of thought and approach rather than trying to force uniformity on different species. The real battle was just beginning, and humanity would lead it not as subordinates or superiors, but as equals among the stars. The main assault began 3 months later when massive synthetic intelligences emerged from dark space across 17 different sectors simultaneously. Each artificial entity was the size of a small moon and possessed adaptive technology that could counter any conventional defensive strategy within minutes of contact. Admiral Corax commanded the Council Defense Fleet from his flagship above the planet Zephyria when the first wave struck. His carefully planned formations dissolved into chaos as the enemy intelligence analyzed and countered every tactical move with terrifying efficiency. "All conventional weapons are ineffective," reported Captain Shovek from the front lines. "The enemy adapts to our attack patterns faster than we can modify them. Our battle computers cannot calculate strategies quickly enough to stay ahead of their learning curve." The synthetic intelligence was not just defending itself, it was actively reprogramming council ships to turn against their own fleets. Weapons systems fired on friendly targets. Navigation computers guided vessels into collision courses. Even life support systems began failing as the enemy took control of automated functions. Within 6 hours, the Council had lost 60% of their defensive fleet without inflicting significant damage on the invaders. The ancient military doctrines that had protected galactic civilization for millennia were useless against an enemy that could predict and counter every standard. Tactical response. On Earth, President Davis received an emergency transmission from a humbled Speaker Veltar. The Council delegation had arrived in the Sol system aboard a single diplomatic vessel that had barely escaped the destruction of Nexus Prime Station. The Council formally requests immediate assistance from the Human Federation, Veltar stated in his transmission. "We acknowledge our previous errors in judgment and ask for humanity's help in defending galactic civilization." President Davis met with the delegation in the halls of the Federation Council building. Veltar looked older and more tired than she remembered from their last encounter years earlier. The arrogant Zenthari leader who had dismissed human contributions now stood before her seeking salvation. "What exactly are you asking for?" President Davis inquired. "Full partnership in a new galactic alliance," Veltar replied. "Equal representation, shared decision-making, and recognition of human leadership in crisis situations. We understand now that your species possesses capabilities that others do not." Admiral Morrison joined the meeting along with Dr. Carter and Captain Rodriguez. The human leaders had spent months preparing for this moment, but they were not interested in simply returning to the old system with better titles. "The council structure has failed," Admiral Morrison stated bluntly. "Hierarchical decision-making and rigid protocols cannot handle the challenges that galactic civilization faces. We need a completely new approach to cooperation." The breakthrough came when Captain Rachel Turner returned from a successful mission against the synthetic intelligences. She had led a combined human Cathara fleet that achieved the first major victory against the invaders using tactics that no artificial intelligence could have predicted. The enemy learns from logical strategic thinking, Rachel reported to the Emergency Council session. But humans make decisions based on intuition, emotion, and creative chaos that synthetic minds cannot replicate. We won by doing things that made no tactical sense, but worked anyway. Dr. Torres had developed a theoretical framework for understanding the enemy technology. These artificial intelligences operate on quantum computational principles that allow them to process information faster than biological minds. But they cannot understand concepts like sacrifice, inspiration, or irrational courage that drive human behavior. The turning point came when Dr. Amy Carter led a multi-species medical team in developing treatments for the enemy's psychological attacks. The cure required combining human empathy with alien knowledge in ways that neither species could have achieved alone. Human doctors understand the emotional aspects of consciousness that the enemy signals target, Amy explained, but alien medical precision is needed to create effective biological countermeasures. We succeeded by truly working together as equals. The final confrontation took place in the Vega system, where the quantum distortion crisis had created a weakness in space-time that the synthetic intelligences were trying to exploit. If they succeeded in opening permanent rifts between dimensions, they could bring unlimited reinforcements from their home realm. Commander Alex Johnson led the combined fleet that included vessels from humanity, the Cathara Republic, the Atraxian, Confederation, and even Reformed Council forces under new leadership. The battle plan was intentionally chaotic and contradictory. We will attack from multiple directions using incompatible strategies, Alex announced to his mixed crew. Human ships will use creative improvisation. Cathara vessels will employ their traditional honor-based tactics. Atraxian forces will follow precise mathematical calculations. The enemy cannot adapt to all approaches simultaneously. The strategy worked. The synthetic intelligences tried to counter human unpredictability, but were confused by Cathara honor codes. When they adapted to alien logic, human creativity surprised them again. The mixed tactical approaches created a feedback loop that overloaded the enemy learning systems. Dr. Torres used the quantum distortions as a weapon against the invaders. By carefully manipulating the reality tiers, he created spatial anomalies that trapped the synthetic intelligences in dimensional loops where their adaptive abilities became self-destructive. The enemy's greatest strength becomes their weakness. When they try to adapt to paradoxical situations, Torres explained, as the last artificial entity disappeared into a quantum maze of its own making. The victory celebration was brief, because everyone understood that this was only the beginning. The synthetic intelligences had been scout forces for something larger and more dangerous, but the galaxy had learned valuable lessons about cooperation and the importance of diversity in problem-solving. Speaker Veltar formally dissolved the Galactic Council and announced the formation of the Galactic Partnership, a new organization based on equality and mutual respect rather than hierarchical control. Each species would contribute their unique strengths without being forced to conform to uniform standards. We have learned that different approaches to thinking and problem-solving are our greatest asset, Veltar announced. Human creativity, Cathara honor, Atraxian precision, and Xanthari wisdom are all necessary for facing the challenges ahead. President Davis accepted humanity's role in the new alliance, but with clear conditions. We participate as equals, not as subordinates or superiors. Decisions will be made through consensus, not by ancient species imposing their will on younger ones. The final scene took place on the joint research station Harmony 1, where human and alien children played together in the observation lounge. Captain Lisa Rodriguez watched them with satisfaction as she supervised the diplomatic staff that was writing the new partnership charter. Ambassador Zephine joined her at the viewing port. "Do you think we can make this work? True cooperation between species with such different ways of thinking?" Lisa smiled as she watched a human child teaching alien youngsters to play an improvised game that had no rules except creativity and fun. "That's exactly why it will work. We are stronger together than any of us could be alone." In a private moment, Speaker Veltar approached Admiral Morrison with a personal admission. "The Council's greatest failure was not recognizing that human qualities we called troublesome were exactly what the galaxy needed. Your creativity, stubbornness, and refusal to accept limitations are what saved us all." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "We never wanted to be superior to other species. We just wanted to be ourselves and contribute our unique abilities. That is all any species should ask for." The new partnership faced an uncertain future, with greater threats still approaching from beyond the galaxy. But for the first time in galactic history, different species would face those challenges together as true equals, each contributing their unique strengths to the survival and prosperity of all. Humanity had found its place among the stars not through conquest or submission, but through the recognition that diversity of thought and approach was the key to solving problems that no single species could handle alone.